In this lecture, we're going to use the function check to write different checks against the response. So we already know the structure, but essentially what we want to check, for example, is the status code. So we have access here to the entire response. So we can replace here this value true, which I said, it's going to be passed. So we're going to remove a hard-coded value and we're going to put something dynamic here. So we have this response, which depending on what comes back from the server, it's always going to be something different. And then, for example, the name of the check should be status is 200 because we expect the status code to be 200. Now, this value here, typically we were going to replace it with something else. For example, we can write here an R for response. And we're not going to use a res because then it's going to be a bit weird, like which one is which. But we have here something like R, so we have access to R. And we're going to have to write here a condition. So we're not going to check if the response is true. We're going to check if the response status code is 200. So in this case, we're going to have to go here. So this is the response. It has different properties. So we're going to write here dot. We're going to see here it has the body and many other things, but also status. So I'm going to write here status so I can access now the status property. So again, we have here the response, which you have stored after making this HTTP call. We're passing this to the check function. And again, we're going to have access to it through this other function here. So we're going to use here the variable R. So we have r.status equals, in this case, 200. Let's go ahead and save this and run the script. What we're going to see here is that this check passes. So it's going to say here status is 200 and hopefully the status was 200. Now, whenever we are writing assertion, it is important that we also test our code, because if we make a mistake and for whatever reason this assertion doesn't work, then we haven't really gained anything from writing this code. So let me show you, for example, I'm going to add here /foo. And let's go ahead and run this once again. And in this case, this is going to fail. So this page doesn't exist, /foo probably returns 404. We can check that with console log if we're not sure. And this status will fail. Now, if for some reason we forget the syntax for writing a comparison in JavaScript and only write here the equal sign, let's see what happens in that scenario. What we're going to get here is status is 200 because this is an assignment here. It's no longer a comparison. So for that reason, until you get very comfortable writing such tests, it's always important that you verify that they will fail if they need to fail. This is a very common issue, especially in the beginning. You need to be super careful not to make these beginner mistakes. So this is why I'm showing them to you. All right. So now I have written this assertion here. How about if we're checking the body as well? So for example, okay, we're getting back to 100, but is it the page that we expect? So in this case, we are here at test.k6.io. And this is the page that we want to see. So what we can do to make sure that we are indeed on this page and not on some other page is, for example, to test after this string. So we can check if the page contains this particular string. So I'm going to go ahead and simply copy it from here and go back to the editor. I'm going to write it as a comment so that I can use it later on. Perfect. What we can do next is write another check. I'm going to copy the code that we already have because we know it is working. So what we can do here, so we can write a check, and the name of the check can be something. Page is the start page, so the first page of our application. And then what we can do here is, instead of the property status, we can get a property body. And for example, we can check if the property body equals this thing, which we have copied from here before. So let's go ahead and try it out. And this time we see status is 200, page is start page. Now, the reason why this is failing is because the body contains this information, but it also contains many other things. So if we would use console log on the body, we're going to see a lot of HTML tags and a lot of many other things. So when working with a body, it is very improbable that we're going to exactly check that the entire HTML is exactly as we expected. So for that reason, what we typically do is we are using something like response.body, and then we're going to use here a method which is called includes. So this is a super useful method, because then we can say, essentially, does the body include this entire string that we have here? I'm going to put here quote at the end. We put it the right spot. And then, of course, we should also check if this is true, right? So this is a comparison that we can make here. So we are using in the response that we're getting body.includes, and we're checking if it includes this string. And if it does, we have to close here the call. So you can see here, includes is a function and takes this as an argument. Let's go ahead and run it once again. I'm going to see here, start page is working properly. Status is 200 is working properly. Now, includes already returns a Boolean. So we can also drop this comparison here. We don't need triple equals true, because this in itself, if it evaluates true, then it's already good. So write once again, start page. Let's make sure that this is actually working properly. So I'm going to go here to the context page. The context page doesn't include the text that we expect. I'm going to copy the address. And inside here, I'm going to replace here the address that we're getting. Let me run this once again. And this time, you're going to see here, page is not start page. So we have a status 200, but just because we are getting back a status 200, it doesn't mean that everything is as we expect. There can even be situations when we're getting back a status 200, but if we're actually going to that address, we can actually get an error and saying, hey, this application has crashed or something like that. We're getting back to 100, but the page itself is total nonsense. So the application itself doesn't actually work. So for that reason, we typically do both checks. We're checking for the status, because if we're getting back 404 or something like that, we don't have to worry about the body if we don't expect that. But if we're getting 200, then okay, let's check also the body itself just to make sure. So in this case, we have tested that the check that we have written here is actually working as expected. So I'm going to remove here the context page so that we can go back. I'm going to run this once again. Page is start page and status is 200. Both checks are working without any issues. Now we have written this as two separate checks, but I want you to remember that this is actually here an object where we can write multiple checks in one. So in order to add a new property to this object, all we have to do here is write a comma, and we're just gonna select this entire line that we have here and paste it here. Of course, if this assertion is like too long, maybe we can just reduce it to something a bit shorter. The collection of web pages should also be like long enough. And then we're gonna remove also this check from here. So this is how we can combine two different checks. Again, we're gonna run the code just to make sure. Now, whenever you're writing code, it is super important that you execute this code all the time, just to make sure that you're not making any mistakes. And if something doesn't work anymore, always try to go back to something that has worked and try to understand what you have added that has caused this to fail. So this is how we can write assertions in K6. Writing assertion is key for performance test automation. We want to let K6 evaluate if things are as expected, and we don't want to do anything manually. So it is super important that we can write these checks so that we write a check once, we're making sure that it's working as expected, and then let K6 run it as many times as needed.